In the beginning, before mortals walked the earth, before the sun traced its familiar path across the sky, before the very concept of order existed in our universe, there was darkness, there was chaos, and there was fear. Tonight, we journey back to a time when the world was young and dangerous, when primordial forces shaped reality itself, and when the fate of all existence hung in the balance of a single prophecy. This is the story of Zeus, not the mighty king of Olympus you may know from marble statues and Hollywood films, but Zeus the child, Zeus the hidden one, Zeus, the prophesied destroyer of his own father. Settle in, dear listeners, as we explore one of mythology's most captivating tales, a story of family betrayal, cosmic warfare, and the rise of a god who would reshape the very foundations of divine power. This is the rise of Zeus, from a helpless infant hidden in a cave to the thunderbolt-wielding sovereign of Mount Olympus. But to understand Zeus's ascension, we must first understand the world he was born into, a world ruled by his father, Kronos, the Titan who devoured his own children to prevent a prophecy that would ultimately come to pass anyway.
Picture, if you will, the cosmos in its infancy. Not the ordered universe we know today, with its predictable seasons and reliable laws of nature, but something far more primal and chaotic. In the beginning, there was only chaos, a yawning void of nothingness from which all things would eventually emerge. From this primordial emptiness came Gaia, the earth herself, vast and nurturing. Then came Uranus, the sky, who spread himself across Gaia like a star-spangled blanket. Their union gave birth to the first generation of divine beings, the Titans, massive and powerful entities who embodied the raw forces of nature itself. Among these Titans was Kronos, whose name meant time in the ancient tongue. Kronos was ambitious, cunning, and utterly ruthless. When his father Uranus began imprisoning his siblings, the Cyclops and the 100-handed ones, in the depths of Tartarus, it was Kronos who took action. Armed with a sickle given to him by his mother Gaia, he ambushed Uranus and, well, let's say he ensured his father would never again rule the cosmos. With Uranus overthrown, Kronos became the new ruler of the universe. He took as his queen his sister, Rhea, and together they presided over what the Greeks called the Golden Age, a time of peace and prosperity when humans lived like gods, free from toil, aging, and sorrow. But Kronos carried within him a terrible fear. You see, when he had castrated his father, Uranus had spoken a prophecy with his dying breath. As you have overthrown me, so too shall one of your children overthrow you. The words echoed in Kronos' mind, growing louder with each passing eon. Initially, Kronos might have dismissed this as the desperate curse of a defeated enemy, but as time passed, and remember, Kronos was time itself, the prophecy began to consume his thoughts. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential usurper. Every whisper of wind carried hints of rebellion. When Rhea bore their first child, Hestia, Cronos looked upon the infant and saw not his beloved offspring, but his potential destroyer. The prophecy had not specified which child would overthrow him, only that one would. Unable to bear the uncertainty, Cronos made a decision that would echo through the ages. He swallowed the child whole. Rhea screamed in horror and anguish, but Cronos was unmoved. He told her, "It is necessary," his voice heavy with the weight of inevitability. The prophecy cannot come to pass if there are no children to fulfill it. But Rhea's suffering had only just begun. When their second child was born, Demeter, who would one day govern the harvest, Cronos again opened his massive jaws and swallowed her. Then came Hera, future queen of the gods, who met the same fate. Then Hades, dark lord of the underworld, disappeared down his father's gullet. Finally, Poseidon, who would one day rule the seas, joined his siblings in the terrible prison of Cronos' stomach. 5 children, 5 divine beings of immense potential, trapped in the darkness of their father's belly, neither alive nor dead, neither growing nor aging, suspended in a timeless prison while Cronos ruled supreme, believing he had cheated fate.
Rhea had endured the loss of 5 children. 5 times she had felt the joy of creation, followed immediately by the devastating agony of loss. 5 times she had begged Cronos to spare their offspring. 5 times she had been refused. But when she found herself pregnant for the 6th time, something within her hardened into resolve. This child, this precious life growing within her, would not suffer the same fate as its siblings, even if it meant defying the Lord of Time itself. As her pregnancy progressed, Rhea began to plan. She couldn't oppose Cronos directly. He was far too powerful, and his paranoia had made him watchful and suspicious. But perhaps, she thought, she could employ the very cunning that had allowed Cronos to overthrow his own father. When the time of birth approached, Rhea did not retreat to their palace on Mount Othrys, as she had with her previous children. Instead, she fled in secret to the island of Crete, to a hidden cave on Mount Ida, far from Cronos' watchful eyes. Imagine this cave, dear listeners, not the tourist attraction it would become in later centuries, but a wild, primordial place carved from living rock by eons of wind and water. Stalactites hung like ancient teeth from the ceiling, and the sound of dripping water echoed endlessly in the depths. It was here, in this hidden sanctuary, attended only by the nymphs of Crete and the she-boat Amalthea, that Rhea gave birth to her 6th child. The moment Zeus entered the world, the very air seemed to crackle with potential. Even as an infant, there was something different about him, a spark in his eyes, a strength in his grip, an aura of destiny that surrounded him like a golden aura. But there was no time for wonder or celebration. Cronos would soon expect Rhea to return with the newborn, ready for his grisly feast. Rhea had to act quickly. She wrapped the infant Zeus in soft cloth and gave him to the nymphs to hide and care for. Then, with a mother's desperate ingenuity, she found a large stone, roughly the size and weight of a newborn god. This she wrapped in swaddling clothes, creating a convincing decoy.
When Rhea returned to Mount Othrys, she carried the stone as if it were her precious child. Kronos, still drunk on his paranoid certainty that he had outsmarted prophecy, didn't examine the bundle too closely. He simply opened his jaws and swallowed what he believed to be his sixth child, the stone disappearing into the darkness of his gullet to join what he thought were his siblings. Rhea watched her husband consume the rock with a mixture of satisfaction and terror. She had saved her child, but now the real challenge began, keeping Zeus hidden until he was strong enough to fulfill his destiny. In the hidden caves of Crete, Zeus began his extraordinary childhood, but this was no ordinary divine upbringing. Every moment of every day had to be carefully orchestrated to avoid detection by Kronos, whose paranoia had only grown with time. The nymphs who cared for Zeus were the Meleae, born from the blood of Uranus when Kronos had overthrown him. They understood the weight of their responsibility. They were nurturing not just a child, but the future ruler of the cosmos. Every one of them was bound by sacred oaths to protect the infant god, even at the cost of their own lives. Zeus was fed on the milk of Amalthea, the she-goat whose very name meant tender one. This was no ordinary goat, but a creature of such divine nature that her milk granted not just nourishment, but power. As Zeus grew, fed on this celestial sustenance, his strength increased exponentially, far beyond what even normal divine children experienced. But perhaps the most crucial guardians of the young Zeus were the Curetes, warrior priests who had devoted themselves to his protection. These were no ordinary soldiers, but mystic warriors who understood that the fate of the universe hung in the balance of their success. The Curetes developed an ingenious solution to the problem of Zeus's cries potentially reaching Kronos' ears. Whenever the infant god began to cry or babble, the Curetes would leap into wild dances, clashing their bronze shields and spears together in rhythmic cacophony. The sound echoed through the Cretan hills, masking any noise the divine child might make. Picture these dedicated guardians dancing their frenzied dance day and night, their bronze weapons catching the Mediterranean sunlight as they spun and leapt. They were exhausted, their ears ringing from the constant noise, their muscles aching from the endless motion, but they never stopped, never faltered, because they knew that a single moment of carelessness could doom not just Zeus, but all of creation. As Zeus grew from infant to child, his divine nature became increasingly apparent. His eyes held an intelligence far beyond his apparent age, and when storms passed over Crete, the lightning seemed to dance around him like a playful pet. The nymphs whispered among themselves that they could sometimes see sparks flickering between his tiny fingers, harbingers of the thunderbolts he would one day wield. But Zeus was not just physically precocious. His mind was developing at an extraordinary rate. By the time he appeared to be a young boy, he possessed the wisdom and cunning of a mature god. He began to understand the true nature of his situation, piecing together the story of his hidden birth and the terrible fate that had befallen his siblings. More importantly, he began to plan. As Zeus matured in his Cretan sanctuary, he began to realize that raw power alone would not be sufficient to overthrow Kronos. His father had ruled for eons, accumulating vast experience and allies among the Titans. A direct assault, even by a god as potentially mighty as Zeus, would likely end in failure and the fulfillment of Kronos' fears, just not in the way the Titan Lord expected. Zeus needed allies, but more than that, he needed a strategy that would exploit his father's own nature against him. And for that, he would need to consult with someone whose wisdom exceeded even his own rapidly developing intellect. This someone was Metis, the Titaness of wisdom and cunning counsel. Metis was daughter to the Titans Oceanus and Tethys, making her technically Zeus's cousin, but family relationships among the Titans were complex and often transcended simple blood ties. What mattered was that Metis was renowned throughout the divine realm for her intelligence and her ability to see solutions where others saw only problems. The meeting between Zeus and Metis had to be arranged in absolute secrecy. It took place not in the caves of Crete, but in a sacred grove on the slopes of Mount Ida, far from any location where Kronos might have spies. The very trees seemed to lean in to listen as the young god and the wise Titaness spoke in hushed tones. Zeus explained his situation to Metis, his hidden upbringing, his knowledge of his siblings' fate, and his desire to fulfill the prophecy that had so terrified his father. Metis listened carefully, her ancient eyes studying the young god's face as he spoke. Picture, if you will, the court of Kronos in its full glory. Mount Othrys rose like a Titan's throne from the primordial landscape, its peaks wreathed in clouds that swirled with the power of time itself. The palace that crowned its summit was a structure of impossible grandeur, walls of polished obsidian that reflected not the present, but glimpses of past and future, corridors that seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of space, and at its heart, the throne room where Kronos held court. It was into this seat of ultimate power that Zeus walked, disguised as a young cupbearer seeking employment in the royal household. He had adopted the name Ganymedes, a common enough name among minor deities that it would not attract attention. The approach to Kronos' throne was a calculated test of nerves. The throne room stretched for what seemed like miles, its floor a mirror black surface that reflected not Zeus's false appearance, but glimpses of his true divine nature. With each step, he had to maintain perfect control, suppressing the lightning that wanted to dance around his fingertips and the aura of power that was his birthright. Kronos himself was a sight to inspire both awe and terror. Imagine a being of such immense age and power that time itself seemed to flow differently around him. His hair was the silver white of eternity. His eyes held the depth of eons. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of cosmic authority. "Approach," Kronos commanded, his gaze fixing on the disguised Zeus. "You seek employment in our household?" Zeus bowed deeply, exactly as a minor deity would before the Lord of Time. "Yes, great Kronos. I am skilled in the preparation and serving of ambrosia and nectar. I seek only the honor of serving in your magnificent court." For a moment that seemed to stretch into infinity, Kronos studied the young god before him. Zeus felt his father's gaze like a physical weight, probing, searching, looking for any sign of deception or hidden power. This was the crucial moment. If Kronos detected anything suspicious, Zeus would face the full fury of the Titan Lord, and his rebellion would end before it truly began. But Kronos saw only what Zeus wanted him to see: a young, eager deity of minor importance, presenting no threat to his eternal rule. Perhaps his paranoia had been soothed by centuries without challenge, or perhaps his consumption of the stone Rhea had substituted had convinced him that the prophecy had been thwarted. Whatever the reason, Kronos nodded his approval. "You may serve, but know that in our court failure is not tolerated, and betrayal is punished with eternal torment." Zeus bowed again, hiding the grim smile that tugged at his lips. "I understand completely, great lord. I live only to serve."
For weeks, Zeus served in Kronos' court, learning the routines and rhythms of his father's household. He proved to be an exceptional cupbearer, attentive, discreet, and skilled in the preparation of divine refreshments. More importantly, he began to earn Kronos' trust through small acts of service and seeming devotion. During this time, Zeus observed his father carefully, studying not just his habits, but his psychology. He noticed how Kronos' paranoia had evolved over the millennia. The Titan Lord no longer feared external threats as much as internal ones. He had surrounded himself with loyal servants and had developed elaborate protocols to prevent assassination or betrayal. But in his obsessive focus on preventing attacks, Kronos had overlooked the possibility that the threat might come from someone he trusted, someone who served him daily with apparent devotion. The day chosen for the plan's execution was the anniversary of Kronos' victory over Uranus, a day of celebration throughout the Titan's court. The revelry would provide perfect cover for Zeus's actions, and Kronos' guard would be at its lowest point. In the private chambers that had been assigned to him, Zeus carefully prepared Midas's special draught. The potion itself was nearly colorless, with just the faintest golden shimmer that could be mistaken for the natural effervescence of nectar. But its power was immense. When consumed, it would cause the victim to violently expel everything in their stomach, no matter how long it had been there or how thoroughly digested it might seem. The crucial moment came during the evening's feast. Kronos, in high spirits from the day's celebrations, called for his finest nectar, the vintage reserved for only the most special occasions. This was Zeus's chance. With hands that appeared steady but concealed the trembling of barely controlled excitement, Zeus approached the great throne. He carried a chalice of worked gold inlaid with precious gems, filled with nectar that gleamed like liquid starlight. Hidden within that divine drink was Midas's potion, invisible to the eye, but potent beyond measure. "Your nectar, great Kronos," Zeus said, bowing as he offered the chalice, "the finest vintage from your personal reserves."
Kronos accepted the cup with a satisfied smile, completely unaware that he was accepting his own doom from the hands of his supposedly dead son. He raised the chalice in a toast to his continued reign, and then, in a single draught, he consumed the entire contents. Zeus stepped back, maintaining his servant's posture while internally counting the moments until the potion took effect. According to Metis, it would take time to work. The emetic had to fight against Kronos' constitution and the magical nature of what he had consumed so long ago. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Kronos continued his conversation with his courtiers, apparently unaffected. But Zeus noticed the first signs: a slight pallor in his complexion, a hand pressed briefly to his stomach, a momentary grimace of discomfort. Then, suddenly, Kronos doubled over in agony. The chalice fell from his grasp, clattering to the obsidian floor as the Lord of Time gripped his stomach in unprecedented pain. The entire court fell silent, staring in shock at their seemingly invulnerable ruler. What is happening?" Kronos gasped, his voice strained with agony. Zeus could have maintained his disguise a few moments longer, but the sight of his father's distress awakened something primal within him. This was the moment he had trained for, planned for, dreamed of throughout his hidden childhood. "Justice," Zeus said, his voice suddenly carrying the full weight of his divine authority. "Justice is what happens, Father." As he spoke, his disguise fell away like a discarded cloak. The humble cupbearer vanished, replaced by Zeus in his true form, young, powerful, and crackling with barely contained lightning. The court erupted in gasps of shock and terror as they realized who had been serving them. But their shock was nothing compared to what happened next. Kronos, still writhing in agony, suddenly began to retch violently. And from his mouth, in reverse order of their consumption, came Zeus's siblings. First came Poseidon, god of the seas, emerging into the light after eons of imprisonment. Then Hades, lord of the underworld, his presence causing the very air to grow cold. Hera followed, her regal bearing intact despite her ordeal. Then Demeter, goddess of the harvest, and finally Hestia, the eldest, goddess of hearth and home. One by one, Zeus's siblings stood before their father, no longer helpless infants, but fully grown gods in their own right. They had been conscious during their imprisonment, feeling their power grow, waiting for this moment of liberation. The stone that Rhea had substituted for Zeus was the last thing to emerge, clattering to the floor like a sound of thunder. Kronos, weakened by the magical emetic and shocked by the sudden appearance of the children he thought he had destroyed, staggered backward from his throne. For the first time in eons, fear flickered in his ancient eyes as he realized that the prophecy he had tried so desperately to prevent had come to pass after all. "Impossible," he whispered. "I devoured you all. I saw to it myself." Zeus stepped forward, lightning beginning to dance around his hands as his true power manifested for the first time in its full glory. "You devoured your fear, Father," he said, "and now it has consumed you." The liberation of Zeus's siblings marked not the end of the story,
but the beginning of the most catastrophic conflict the universe had ever seen. What followed would be known to history as the Titanaki, the war between the Titans and the Olympians, a struggle that would rage for 10 years and reshape the very foundations of reality. Kronos, despite his shock at Zeus's revelation, was far from defeated. He was still the Lord of Time, still possessed of immense power, and still commanded the loyalty of most of the Titans. As soon as he recovered from the immediate effects of the emetic, he began to rally his forces for what he knew would be the ultimate battle for control of the cosmos. This was not a war as mortals understand war, with armies marching across finite battlefields. This was a conflict that spanned dimensions, where every mountain became a fortress, every ocean a battlefield, and every storm system a weapon of mass destruction. The very fabric of space and time trembled under the assault of divine powers unleashed without restraint. Zeus and his siblings retreated to Mount Olympus, a peak that rose even higher than Mount Othrys and possessed unique properties that made it an ideal stronghold. Here, they established their base of operations and began to plan their strategy for the coming conflict. But Zeus quickly realized that despite their divine power, he and his siblings were outnumbered. Kronos commanded not just the Titans who had remained loyal to him, but also various other divine beings who had prospered under his rule and feared the changes that Zeus's victory might bring. It was here that Zeus's intelligence proved as valuable as his strength. Rather than simply gathering power through force, he began to seek out allies among those who had suffered under Kronos's paranoid rule. His first and most crucial alliance was with his uncles, the Cyclops, whom Kronos had kept imprisoned in Tartarus, along with the 100-handed ones. The rescue of these primordial beings was a masterpiece of strategic planning and divine heroism. Zeus himself descended into the depths of Tartarus, a realm of punishment and despair that existed at the very foundations of the universe. Here, in chains forged from the essence of despair itself, he found the Cyclopses, Brontes, Steropes, and Argus, thunder, lightning, and bright. The Cyclopses had been imprisoned for so long that they had almost forgotten the concept of freedom. Their massive forms were bent and scarred from eons of torment, their single eyes dim with accumulated suffering. But when Zeus appeared before them, wielding keys stolen from Kronos' own treasury, something stirred in their ancient hearts. "Brothers," Zeus said, using the formal address that acknowledged their divine kinship, "I offer you what Kronos never would: freedom, respect, and vengeance against the one who has tormented you." The liberation of the Cyclopses transformed the war. In gratitude for their freedom, they forged weapons of unprecedented power for Zeus and his siblings. For Zeus himself, they created the Thunderbolt, not just a weapon, but a manifestation of cosmic force that could split mountains and shake the heavens. For Poseidon, they forged the Trident, capable of summoning earthquakes and tsunamis. For Hades, they crafted a helmet of invisibility that would allow him to move unseen through any realm. But perhaps even more valuable than the Cyclopses were the 100-handed ones: Codus, Briareus, and Gyes, each possessed of 50 heads and 100 arms. These primordial giants were living siege engines, capable of hurling boulders the size of mountains with machine-like precision and speed. With these new allies, Zeus began to turn the tide of the war. The conflict that had seemed like an impossible struggle against superior numbers became a more even match, but Kronos was not helpless.
he began to employ increasingly desperate tactics, calling upon powers that had been forbidden since the dawn of time. The war's middle years were marked by escalations that threatened to tear apart the fabric of existence itself. Kronos began to manipulate time in ways that violated the natural order, creating temporal paradoxes and causality loops that confused and disoriented Zeus's forces. Mountains were moved through time, appearing and disappearing as past and future collided. Zeus responded by unleashing the full fury of his weather powers, creating storms that spanned continents and lightning bolts that could be seen from other dimensions. The very sky became a battlefield, with clouds serving as fortifications and thunder as artillery. Meanwhile, Poseidon reshaped the world's oceans, creating new seas where land had been and raising new continents from the depths. Hades opened portals to the underworld, allowing the spirits of the dead to join the conflict, though on which side none could be sure. As the 10th year of the war dawned, both sides had been pushed to their limits. The earth itself bore the scars of divine conflict. New mountain ranges thrust up from the battlefield, seas boiled away to nothing, and the very climate had been altered by the supernatural forces at play. It was then that Zeus made the decision that would determine the war's outcome. Rather than continuing the stalemate, he would stake everything on a single, decisive assault against Mount Othrys itself.
The assault on Mount Othrys was planned with the precision of a chess grandmaster and the fury of a natural disaster. Zeus had learned much during the 10 years of warfare, not just about strategy and tactics, but about leadership and the terrible weight of command. The attack began at dawn on the summer solstice, when Zeus's power over the sky was at its peak. As the sun rose, it found the heavens already dark with storm clouds that stretched from horizon to horizon. This was not a natural storm, but a manifestation of divine wrath that made the very air crackle with potential energy. Zeus himself led the assault, mounted on a chariot pulled by 4 immortal horses that galloped across the sky itself. Lightning flowed around him like liquid fire, and his voice, when he spoke the words of challenge, could be heard across all the realms of existence. "Zeus," he called, his voice echoing from every mountain peak and ocean depth. "Kronos, come forth and face the justice you have so long avoided. The age of fear is ending. Let the age of order begin." The response was immediate and devastating. Kronos emerged from his stronghold, wreathed in the power of time itself, his form seeming to shift between past and future aspects of himself. Around him rallied the last of his loyal titans, Atlas, Monoceus, Prometheus's brother, Epimetheus, and others who had chosen to stand with the old order rather than embrace the new. The battle between Zeus and Kronos was a conflict that transcended physical combat. When Zeus hurled his thunderbolts, Kronos slowed time around them, causing the divine weapons to hang motionless in the air. When Kronos unleashed temporal storms that aged whatever they touched, Zeus countered with lightning that existed outside of time's flow. Around them, their allies clashed in combats that reshaped the landscape with every blow. The 100-handed ones hurled mountains at the Titans with mechanical precision, while the Cyclopses forged weapons cleaved through defenses that had stood since the dawn of creation. But the tide of battle truly turned when Gaia herself, the Earth Mother, who was grandmother to both sides,
declared her judgment. She had grown weary of Cronus's paranoid rule and the damage his fear had inflicted on the natural order. Rising from the depths of the earth, she spoke words that carried the weight of geological ages. Enough. The prophecy will be fulfilled, as prophecies must be. Cronus, your time is ended. Zeus, your time begins. Let the earth bear witness to this changing of the cosmic guard. With Gaia's support, Zeus found the strength for one final, overwhelming assault, drawing power not just from his own divine nature, but from the storm, the earth, the loyalty of his siblings, and the justice of his cause. He hurled a thunderbolt of such intense power that it seemed to contain the entire fury of creation itself. The bolt struck Cronus directly, and for a moment, the Lord of Time seemed to freeze, not in temporal stasis, but in the absolute stillness of defeat. His ancient form wavered, the power that had sustained him for eons finally broken by his son's assault and his own accumulated guilt. "The prophecy," Cronus whispered as he fell. I tried to prevent. You tried to cheat fate, but fate cannot be cheated, only delayed. Your fear created the very future you sought to avoid."
With Cronus's defeat, the Titan Maki came to its end. But Zeus's challenges were far from over. Victory in war is one thing. Establishing a just and lasting peace is quite another. The young king of the gods faced the enormous task of rebuilding a universe that had been shattered by a decade of divine warfare. His first decision would set the tone for all that followed. Rather than executing the defeated Titans or subjecting them to the kind of cruel imprisonment that had characterized Cronus's rule, Zeus chose a more nuanced approach. The Titans who had committed genuine crimes against the cosmic order were imprisoned in Tartarus. But even there, they were treated as prisoners, not torture victims. Cronus himself was given a choice that would have seemed impossible under the old regime: exile rather than execution. Some versions of the story claim he was imprisoned in Tartarus alongside his most loyal followers, but others suggest that Zeus, demonstrating wisdom beyond his apparent years, offered his defeated father the opportunity to rule over the distant Isles of the Blessed, where he could govern the souls of heroes without threatening the new cosmic order. This decision shocked many of Zeus's supporters, who had expected harsh retribution. But Zeus understood something that his father had not: that a ruler's greatest strength lies not in the fear he inspires, but in the justice he dispenses and the mercy he shows to the defeated. "A king who rules through terror," Zeus explained to his siblings, "rules only until someone less fearful comes along. A king who rules through justice and wisdom rules forever, because his subjects choose to obey, rather than being forced to do so." With the immediate question of the defeated Titans resolved, Zeus turned to the larger task of organizing the cosmos. The old order had been hierarchical and rigid, with Cronus making all decisions from his throne atop Mount Othrys. Zeus envisioned something different: a divine government based on shared responsibility and specialized domains. In a move that would define the next age of divine rule, Zeus divided the cosmos among his brothers, creating 3 great kingdoms. He himself would rule the sky
and serve as king of the gods, wielding authority over weather, justice, and the overall governance of both divine and mortal realms. Poseidon received dominion over the seas, all waters, and earthquakes, a realm perfectly suited to his tempestuous nature and immense power. The oceans became his palace, the waves his servants, and every sailor would learn to respect his authority or face the consequences of his wrath. Hades, perhaps drawing the most challenging lot, became lord of the underworld and judge of the dead. His realm was not the Christian hell of later mythology, but rather a complex kingdom where souls were sorted according to their deeds in life. It was a responsibility that required not cruelty, but profound wisdom and absolute fairness. But Zeus's innovation went beyond simple territorial division. He also established what could be called the first divine cabinet, assigning specific responsibilities to his sisters and other allies based on their natural abilities and inclinations. Hera, his sister and eventual queen, became goddess of marriage and family. Ironic, considering the future complexities of their relationship, but initially a recognition of her natural authority and wisdom in matters of social order. Demeter took charge of agriculture and the harvest, her connection to the earth's fertility making her the natural choice to ensure that mortals, when they eventually appeared, would have the means to sustain themselves. Hestia, the eldest and wisest of the siblings, became goddess of the hearth and home, the sacred fire that burned at the center of both individual households and the great cities that would one day rise across the earth. Zeus also honored his wartime allies with positions of great responsibility. The Cyclops became the divine craftsmen, their forge located in the heart of Mount Etna, where they would create wonders that would define the ages to come. The grateful giants pledged their loyalty not just to Zeus personally, but to the concept of just rule that he represented. The hundred-handed ones were given the crucial role of guarding Tartarus, ensuring that the imprisoned Titans could never again threaten the cosmic order. But unlike previous divine jailers, they were instructed to maintain their charges with dignity, providing proof that the new regime would be different from the old. Perhaps most importantly, Zeus established the concept of divine law, not the arbitrary will of a single ruler, but a system of principles that even the gods themselves would be bound to follow. This was revolutionary thinking in a universe that had previously been governed by the whims of whoever held the most power. As the new order took shape, Zeus turned his attention to a project that would define his legacy: the creation and guidance of mortal civilization. The earth, scarred by the Titan Maki, was ready for new life, new possibilities, new stories. Working with his brothers, Zeus oversaw the emergence of the first humans, not as servants or playthings, but as partners in the grand experiment of civilization. These early humans would face challenges that would test their ingenuity, courage, and wisdom, but they would also receive gifts from the gods to help them succeed. As Zeus stood on the peak of Mount Olympus, looking out over a world transformed by divine conflict and divine wisdom, he must have reflected on the long journey that had brought him to this moment. From a hidden infant in a Cretan cave to the king of the gods,
It was a transformation that would have seemed impossible to any observer, yet it had been inevitable from the moment Rhea wrapped that stone in swaddling cloths. The young god, who had once relied on cunning and disguise to survive, had become a leader who commanded through justice and inspired through wisdom. The frightened child who had heard the stories of his devoured siblings had grown into a ruler who chose mercy over vengeance, cooperation over domination. But Zeus understood that his greatest challenges still lay ahead. Ruling was more difficult than conquering, and maintaining justice was harder than achieving victory. The cosmos he now governed was vast and complex, filled with forces and beings that would test his wisdom in ways that battlefield heroics never could.
In the months following his victory, Zeus discovered that the crown of cosmic authority was heavier than any physical burden he had ever carried. Every decision he made rippled across the fabric of reality itself, affecting not just the divine realm, but the mortal world that was beginning to flourish under the new order. His first great test came sooner than expected, in the form of a challenge that would require all the wisdom he had gained during his long journey from hidden child to cosmic ruler. Among the titans who had supported Zeus during the war was Prometheus, whose name meant forethought, and whose intelligence rivaled that of Metis herself. Prometheus had proven invaluable during the conflict, using his gift of prophecy and strategic thinking to help Zeus plan several crucial victories. But as the new order established itself, Prometheus began to chafe under what he saw as Zeus's increasingly cautious approach to governing mortals. The Titan believed that humans had the potential for greatness that was being artificially limited by divine oversight. The crisis came to a head over the seemingly simple question of fire. Zeus had decreed that mortals should develop their civilization gradually, earning each new advancement through their own efforts and wisdom. Fire, he argued, was too powerful a tool to be given freely. It could create or destroy, illuminate or burn, and mortals needed to demonstrate their readiness for such responsibility. Prometheus disagreed. He saw mortals shivering in the cold, struggling to cook their food, unable to work metal or create the tools that would allow their civilization to flourish. In his view, Zeus's caution was actually cruelty, condemning humans to unnecessary suffering for the sake of some abstract principle about earned advancement. The confrontation between Zeus and Prometheus became one of the defining moments of the early Olympian age. When Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity, he wasn't just defying a specific decree. He was challenging Zeus's entire philosophy of governance. Zeus's response would establish precedents that would govern divine-mortal relations for millennia to come. He could have raged, could have used his thunderbolts to destroy Prometheus immediately, could have taken back the fire and punished humanity for accepting it. Instead, he chose a more complex path that demonstrated both his authority and his wisdom. Prometheus was indeed punished, chained to a rock where an eagle would tear at his liver each day, only for it to regenerate each night. But the punishment was designed to be educational rather than purely punitive. Prometheus would suffer, yes, but he would also have eternity to contemplate the consequences of his actions and the complexity of the responsibilities he had assumed so lightly.
More importantly, Zeus allowed humanity to keep the fire. The gift could not be ungiven, and attempting to reclaim it would have required destroying human civilization entirely, a price too high for any principle. "Let this stand as a lesson," Zeus declared to the assembled gods. "We rule not through arbitrary power, but through justice tempered by wisdom." Prometheus chose to act without considering the full consequences of his gift. He will learn, through suffering, to think more carefully. But his error does not justify destroying what mortals have built with the tool he provided. This decision established Zeus not just as a powerful ruler, but as a wise one. He had demonstrated that he could be firm without being tyrannical, that he could punish transgression without destroying those who had benefited from it, and that his authority was strong enough to survive being challenged. The other gods took notice. Here was a leader who thought before acting, who weighed consequences, who understood that true power came from the respect of those governed rather than their fear. As Zeus settled into his role as king of the gods, he began to develop the qualities that would define his long reign. He became known not just for his mighty thunderbolts, but for his ability to mediate disputes, to find solutions that satisfied justice while serving the greater good, and to inspire loyalty through his own example, rather than demanding it through threats. The frightened child who had hidden in a Cretan cave had become a leader worthy of the cosmic authority he wielded. The young god, who relied on cunning and disguise, had grown into a ruler who commanded through manifest wisdom and justice. But Zeus never forgot the lessons of his childhood and youth. He remembered what it felt like to be powerless, to depend on others for protection, to fear the arbitrary wrath of a superior force. These memories informed every decision he made, every judgment he rendered, every mercy he showed. In establishing himself as a just ruler, rather than merely a powerful one, Zeus completed the transformation that had begun in that hidden cave so many years before. He had not just fulfilled the prophecy that had so terrified his father, he had transcended it, becoming not just Cronus's replacement, but something entirely new. A god-king who ruled through wisdom rather than fear. The cosmos that Zeus now governed was a place of order and justice, where even the gods themselves were subject to laws greater than their individual desires. It was a universe where mortals could aspire to greatness, where divine power served divine justice, and where the strong protected the weak rather than exploiting them.
And so, dear listeners, we reach the end of our journey through the rise of Zeus, from hidden child to king of the gods. It is a story that resonates across millennia because it speaks to something fundamental in the human experience, the transformation from powerlessness to responsibility, from fear to wisdom, from victim to protector. The Zeus we have followed through this tale is not the capricious deity of later stories, not the unfaithful husband or arbitrary punisher that would dominate later mythology. This is Zeus the founder, Zeus the wise, Zeus who chose justice over vengeance and mercy over wrath when those choices mattered most. His story reminds us that true leadership is not inherited or seized, but earned through wisdom, demonstrated through justice, and maintained through the consent of those governed. The young god who could have ruled through fear
chose instead to rule through respect, and in doing so created a cosmic order that would endure for ages beyond counting. The lessons Zeus learned in his journey from cave to throne became the foundation stones of Western civilization's understanding of justice, authority, and the proper relationship between rulers and the ruled. When we speak of leaders who must earn their authority, of justice that applies equally to all, of power that serves rather than dominates, we are echoing principles that Zeus established in the earliest days of his reign. The thunder that rolls across our skies today carries with it the echo of that first thunderbolt hurled in righteous anger at Mount Othryss. The lightning that illuminates our storms reflects the same divine fire that once danced around the fingers of a hidden child in a Cretan cave. As you drift toward sleep tonight, perhaps you might spare a thought for that ancient story of transformation and triumph. Consider how a powerless infant, protected by the love of his mother and the devotion of his guardians, grew into a leader whose wisdom would reshape the very foundations of existence. And perhaps in the distant rumble of thunder that occasionally disturbs the night's peace, you might hear not just the clash of warm and cold air masses, but the echo of divine justice, still protecting the innocent and still standing guard against the tyranny of arbitrary power. The rise of Zeus is complete, but his legacy continues in every act of courage that protects the weak, in every decision that chooses wisdom over expedience, and in every thunderstorm that reminds us that some forces in the universe are both mighty and just. Until our paths cross again in the realm of ancient stories and forgotten wisdoms, may your dreams be filled with the echoes of divine thunder and the comfort of knowing that somewhere in the heights of Olympus or the depths of human consciousness, justice still reigns supreme. Sleep well, dear listeners. The gods are watching, and all is well with the world.